All right, so we're just downloading the unemployment.xlsm file. Go ahead and get that unblocked and open. And we're going to dive into what this code does here. So import data is just going to bring in, I'm going to call import county data, pass it a FIPS code, and it will bring in the data for that county. Looking at the data that I'm working with, I've got a series of counties. Each one has a FIPS code. I pass it that FIPS code, and this code then will generate a sheet to bring in the unemployment data from the specified county. Okay, so we're working on loops. What I'd like to do is just, and this is going to be similar to what we've done before, but I'm going to introduce a few new things to you. Let's go ahead and set up a do loop that will just cycle through all the counties. So let's just put the keyword do, and with loop, anytime I make a do loop, what's the other keyword I want to put in here? Do events, because remember, E-V-E-N-T-S, that when I put myself into a loop, that VBA interpreter is just going to do that loop so fast, it's going to like completely monopolize everything that Excel is allowed to do, just processing that loop. And so do event says, hey, kind of each time you iterate on this loop, just poke your head up for just a second, for a nanosecond, and say, hey, is there something that needs to be done? And if so, that'll let us break in if we accidentally put ourselves into an endless loop, which is what we have here because we haven't given any way to exit out of this loop. So let's do this. Let's come here and let's declare a variable out here. Let me dim row as a long integer. And we'll start row off at 2. And now I don't really want to import that data while I'm just working on the loop. So let me just disable that with a single quote. Debug.print row. And then I'll increment row here in the loop. Row equals row plus 1. So the first time through the loop, row is going to equal 2. I'm going to print row. I'm going to increment it. And we're going to loop. Now, I better give myself some way to get out. The way that we've checked to see if we can get out of the loop in the past has been checking to see if the active cell was equal to an empty string, if the active cell was empty. So let's take a look at another way that we might do that, not using the active cell. And so there's a function here called isEmpty. So do until is empty. E-M-P-T-Y. That's just delightful. Is E-M-P. Oh. Excellent. And then I'm going to put some expression here to check when something is empty. Now, the sheet that I'm dealing with is my counties sheet. And there's another little trick. I'll zoom in on this. So Windows plus. So here in my Visual Basic Editor, I've got my properties window open. And if your properties window isn't open, you can always get it open by choosing View, Properties Window. And you'll notice that I have this. Oh, I'm sorry, this is the project Explorer. The one I need to see is my Project Explorer here. So that's View, Project Explorer. And you'll notice that I have my the sheet that I just created when I first ran that macro that builds the web query. It created one called Sheet 2. And interestingly enough, it has like 2 names, both of which are Sheet 2. But this one has 2 names, they're both different. What's in the parentheses here is what shows on the tab. So if I was to go and look at the tab for this, we would see that it's capital C counties in the plural. If I was to look back here at my Project Explorer, that in the parentheses, what's in the tab, but before the parentheses is what's referred to as the code name. I can refer to that sheet, I can refer to that object directly by its code name. we've seen how to refer to sheets using the worksheets collection. Worksheets, and they give it a number, the first worksheet, the second worksheet. Worksheets, and give it its name, we can find that sheet. But now that we see that object name, we can refer to it directly right there. And if you want to change it, by the way, if you have your properties window open, the name shows up right here. So you can just select that and change it. And that would be a different way that you refer to that through code. So I'm going to refer to that sheet just by its sheet name right there. So I'm going to do until is empty, county. Guess I can zoom out now. Dot cells, row number, row, column number 1. And I'll ask the value. So again, is empty is going to return true when the cell is empty. So let me just refer to my active cell, just kind of play with that here in the immediate window for just a minute. Is empty. Active cell, that value. So that's telling me, yeah, the active cell is empty. Active cell is over here on D3, it's empty. But if I activate some cell that's not empty and run it, it'll say false, it's not empty. So is empty returns true if the cell's value is a 0-length string, if it's empty. So now, when I run this, it's going to start off by saying, hey, is row number 2, column number 1, is the value of that cell on my county sheet, is it empty? If it is, I'm out of the loop. If it's not, and it won't be because it's the Alabama code, we're going to print that row. And why don't we go ahead and print the name of the county as well? So that would be county.cells row, and then column 3 has the name. So when I run this loop, it should just scroll through all 3,000 some odd counties and display them here in my immediate window. It'll take, I don't know, 10 seconds or so to get through. So simple do loop. The do loop is the simplest of the functions or of the loops that we have in VBA. And we can do anything with the do loop that we can do with any of the other loops. So the other loops are just a little bit more specific. They're kind of tuned for dealing with particular kinds of tasks. But if the only loop we had at our disposal was a do loop, we could still do everything that we could ever want to do with loops. It just wouldn't be as elegant if we use some of these other kinds of loops. Made it through 3,274. Questions? Yeah.
Are you still sharing the screen after you hit record?
That's a good question. I dearly hope so. Yeah, it looks like I am. You are screen sharing. Yeah. Okay, so now we've got this import county data, and I already have that sheet here. And so I've got my first data here. So let's just go ahead and after we've imported that data, I'm going to leave it commented out for now because I have it, and it's going to takes, I don't know, 15 or 20 seconds, I think, to run that web query. So I'm going to leave this commented out for now because I've got, no, because I'm going to need to have the handle to it. Let's see. Import county data. That's going to become the active sheet. Let's see where we want to do it. It should be okay. That'll be the active sheet. And what I'd like to do is, why don't we bring in the unemployment numbers? Kind of go across that. Those look like those must be percents. Got some projected. I'm just going to go ahead and bring in the unemployment percent. So that is in column 5, column E. And I'd like to bring that data in. And we're going to do so. We are going to just bring in, we'll use a different kind of loop to do it. So I'm going to run it with this sheet active because when this import county data actually runs, it's going to make that new sheet. That will be the active sheet. And so I'm just going to work with the active sheet here. And in so doing, I'm going to introduce us to another loop. This loop is called the for each loop. The for each loop is designed to say, listen, I've got a collection of objects. We played with collections, not the last time we met, but the time before. A collection is itself an object that just has references to a lot of other objects. And one of the common things that we do with a collection of objects is iterate across all of the objects in the collection. And there's a loop specifically designed for doing it. We did it with a do loop earlier, but now look at a loop that's designed specifically for doing it. So what I'd like to do is I would like to get myself a range that starts here on row 8 and goes all the way down. Why don't we end on 193? So I want to end on 193 because 194 looks like it's projected data. And so I'm going to stop here on 193. So let me go ahead and build myself another variable here. I'll call it RNG, it'd be a range as a range object. And then we bind onto that here. Set RNG equal to, and then I want to get a reference to a multi-cell range. In fact, I think I'm going to do it this way. Range, and then I'm just going to tell it, what do we say? We're in E, so we're going to end in E193. And are we starting, was it row 8? I don't remember. Yeah, starts in row 8. So E8 to E193. And let me just go ahead and put the keyword stop right here. The keyword stop says, hey, at this point, when you go to execute this statement, just stop my VBA code. Don't terminate it. Leave it kind of running and in memory and ready to go, but just pause here so I can kind of see what else is going on. Give me a chance to kind of poke around at the variables and see what we have. So I'll run this. It should get to that stop and take me into break mode. You're probably familiar with break mode by now. Anytime you have a runtime error, you're trying to run your code and there's something wrong with it, it'll take you to this yellow line which says, hey, this is the line I'm trying to execute, but I can't proceed. There's something wrong with this line. In this case, it stopped because I asked it to stop. But we have already executed this line, so I should be able to ask some questions about that line. I'll come to my immediate window and just print rng.count. Oops, I asked for column by mistake. It's in the 5th column. Count. 186 cells in that. So interesting thing is that a range is actually, the range object is, it's a collection of cells. And so we can iterate across the cells in this range in a similar way that we iterated across the workbooks we had open, the worksheets that we had in a worksheet. And so what I'd like to do is I would like to take this data, this unemployment data, and I want to put it right on the sheet, right on my county sheet. So let me go ahead and build the loop that's going to iterate across these. So it's called this, for each. So I start off the loop by saying for each. Now, what I have to do is I have to have a control variable. This loop, the do loop, just says do loop, and we're good. But for this loop to work, I have to have a variable declared that I can use to manage the loop. And I'm going to make that, I'm going to declare that right here. So let me dim cell as a range. So this is going to be used to allow me to work with this for each loop. So I'll say for each cell in range, RNG. And then we've got the next keyword at the end is what terminates this loop. So this is a for each loop. I start the loop off by saying for each, give it some information about the variable I'm using to control the loop. And then at the end of the loop, I say next. Next just says go back to the prior for statement. But the magical part here is that this whole collection, 186 cells, for 186 cells in this range object, this is going to iterate 186 times. But the cool thing is that it will bind this variable onto each one of those cells in turn. So if I was to come here and say debug.print cell.address, because cell is a variable that's getting bound onto each one of the cells in this range, then that should start off by putting E8, then E9, E10, all the way through the 193 that we have. So now I'm just going to drag my yellow statement up to the top of that loop and click run again, and it should run through that loop, printing off each of the addresses, and then ultimately stopping when we get to the next stop statement. So that loop has iterated once for every item in the collection. And whether it's a collection of worksheets, workbooks, charts, shapes, cells, it just says bind one of those onto my control variable, and then I can use that control variable to refer to that one element of the collection. Show me how you're feeling about this, 0 to 5. It's a little more abstract than our last one. I'm seeing a lot of 4s and 5s. Okay. So now what I want to do is I just want to pull this data, and we'll just do it one cell at a time, and we'll bring it right over here onto our current row. Now our row is row number 2. So we've got this data here from row 2, and I'm going to start putting this data in column 4. So I'll declare another variable here. I'm going to call this call as an integer. And I'm going to start column out at 4. So when I get to this loop where I'm coming for all of these, let's just get my column variable starting out at 4. That's the first column that I want to write data to. And so as we print off that address, let's go ahead and say that our county sheet cells row number, row, column number, call. So the first time through, it's row number 2, column number 4. So we'll be on this row talking about that column. The first time I hit this statement, it's going to be talking about D2 on my county sheet. I'm going to change the value of that to be equal to whatever is in the cell. Because this loop is looping across every cell in that column that has the data. So the first time through, it should put a value there. I'm going to tell it once it's done that to increment the column. So column's going to take on a new value. What's the value going to be? It's old value plus 1. So we'll come along here. We'll set column to 4. Row is already set to 2. So we're going to be on row number 2. We're going to write to column 4. We're going to change that to 5. Come through again. We're binding on to the next cell in that range. And then we'll be writing to column number 5. Bind on to the next cell, write to column 6, and so forth. So I'm going to go ahead and drag my current statement indicator back up to where I'm declaring that column. And sometimes when I declare a variable while the code is running, it gets a little bit confused. I'm going to find out if that's the case here. No, took it just fine. And so we can now see that it's put that unemployment data right here for Alabama. Questions on the for each loop? All right, well, those are actually the numbers for Gov County. So I think I'm going to stop my code here. I'll leave my stop in there, but I'm going to go ahead and update this code to import the correct one. So instead of importing Gov County's FIP number, I'm going to go ahead and pull the value off of column 1. So now I'm going to call import county. I'm going to pass it whatever value is on my active row column 1. That's where the FIPS number is. So that should bring in numbers for all of Alabama. I'll run that and it should stop. We're running here. Once it's pulled that data in, got a blank sheet where I didn't expect a blank sheet. Let's see what it did. I'm not quite sure why it gave me a blank sheet. I'm going to drag my current statement back up here again, and I'm just going to step through it. So Shift F8 or debug step over. Actually, step into regular old F8 should do what I'm after. Oops, I didn't go far enough. I need to go back to where it's calling the import county data. Let's go see what's going on here. So I'm going to go one statement at a time. Debug step into. The hotkey for me is F8. We'll go see what it's doing down here. Creating a sheet. That's the active sheet. And we're going to try to pull that data. F8. Setting up this web query, refreshing, should tell it to pull that data in. Background query is false, so it's going to wait till it's there. But it looks like it didn't actually bring the data. So let me take a look at what I've sent in here. So while I'm in break mode here, I can take a look at that URL and see what that URL is. So it looks like it's put the FIPS code in here. Just going to see what that brings back if I ask it to go pull the data directly. Truth is, we don't really need it to be pulling in this data to do the looping examples that we want, as long as we've got the one page. Error, invalid series ID. So it doesn't like something about that ID. So I'm going to go ahead and keep stepping through this with F8. I'm going to see, now that I'm back here in my import county, I'm going to look at what FIPS is. 01000. It looks like it got an extra 0 on the front. What happens if I take that 0 off? I'm not sure. And I don't remember this site well enough to be able to go and see how to pull it. Does anyone see what the trouble is with the URL I'm generating? I'm going to try it again with the one that I had hard coded, which was Gov County. Keep stepping with F8. Should bring me back here. So I'm going to pass that hard-coded one in again. Comment out the rest of that line. And we'll see if it pulls the data this time. Made the sheet. Let's see if it pulls the data. Refresh. So maybe it's struggling with the state. It's only taking the counties. but I think I'll leave that data there for now. Just leave that hard coded. F8 to continue coming out. It goes through and pulls the data. Okay, let's go ahead and look at the next loop that I want to do, and that is called the for loop. So we've seen how to deal with this using this as an object. So defining that collection and then iterating across it. I'm going to go ahead and basically duplicate this code using a different kind of loop. So I'm going to stop my code from running. Go ahead and click the stop button, takes me out of break mode. And I'm going to comment, I copy this, and then I'll comment all of that code out. So maybe I'll put a comment here first. Use the for each loop to iterate across a collection. Now, there is no block comment structure in VBA. Most languages have a way to be able to say, start a comment here, end a comment here. Everything between that structure is to be ignored. There is no structure like that for VBA, so you either have to do them line at a time, but there is a tool that will let you do it. And it's handy enough, I'm going to show you how to pull it up. So to be able to bring up the editing toolbar that gives you the ability to comment a whole block, I'm going to come to the View menu, down here to where it says Toolbars, and then I'll choose to show the Edit toolbar. So View, Toolbars, Edit, and then I'll just dock this toolbar up here with the other toolbars. And this one right here is the comment block. So with that selected, I can click on that, and that will comment that block out. Okay, so instead of the for each loop, I'm just going to do what's referred to as the for next loop. It's similar here, but instead of using an object variable to control the loop, it's going to do it with an integer variable. And I've already got this one here called call, so I'll use it. For call control variable, I'm saying, hey, some integer variable that I'm going to use to manage how this loop runs. For call, and then equals, and I give it that first value that I want it to have. So call is going to start at 4, and then I give it what I want it to end with. For call equals 4, 2. In fact, I think instead of, got to figure out what my last column that I want to be writing to. Fortunately, I've got some data here that will show that to me. Oh, we didn't quite ever get it, did we? Sheet 2 has the data. I'm just going to quickly just do a paste transpose here so that I can find out the column number that I'm after to end. Ultimately, that's what I'm after, and it's going to end in column GG. I don't really want this projected number here. Do we know what number, column number GG is? Anyone know what that is? I don't know why you would know that. I don't know it either, but I can ask what the column of the active cell is. It's 189. So now, in fact, instead of printing the cell's address, let me go ahead and print call. And I will comment out these other ones for now. So you'll notice that I'm also commenting out the column, the part that's incrementing the column number. I'm going to go ahead and stop that there, and I am going to comment out my import. So I'm not going to be importing at the moment. It's okay to set the range there, and that's okay with me. I'm going to make sure that the active sheet that I have is a sheet with some data on it. And I'm going to run my code. Now you'll notice that I've got stop both before and after this loop. So when I run this code, it's going to stop before we get to this loop, and then we're going to go statement by statement to kind of watch what this loop does. So I'll run this. And now we'll just use F8 to go one step at a time. So this now has initialized column to 4. This is an important idea, that whatever call was before we got here, that value is gone. It has plugged 4. It has plugged the first value in this series into column. And so now when it goes to print, it's going to print 4. We're going to come to next. I have not changed the value of column. And yet when I get here, it's going to have the next value. The reason it has the next value is that this loop is designed to take an integer and run it across a range. And so when I hit next, when I hit that next statement, it adds 1 to the control variable. So, I mean, that's kind of the point here. I don't want to have to add it, so I've got a loop structure that does it. It's such a common thing to have to run a variable across some integer range that they made a loop specifically for dealing with it. Now, as it turns out, I can tell it to add more than 1 as it goes. So I just printed 6. I think now I'm about to print 7. And step 2 confused it a bit, so I'm going to take it back up to the top of the loop, and we'll start again. It's printing 4, the first value, now 6, because each time it's adding the value that's in the step. Questions here? Go ahead and run that to my breakpoint. I can go the other direction if I want. I can go 198 to 4. But to do that, I've got to step backwards. I've got to tell it to count backwards. So if I run that now, it should count the other direction. Now that I've gone all the way through the loop, what do you think the value of column is? I've got this variable called call, C-O-L. What value is in call at this moment? There's some possible candidates. Maybe when it's done with the loop, it wipes it out and sets it back to 0. Maybe, let's see, we went all the way down to 4. Maybe it's the last value that's on it, 4. What do you suggest? You think it's 5? Well, I don't remember. Let's take a look. Just asked to print out a column, and the value is 3. Whew. That wasn't any of the ones that I suggested. Why is it 3? Yep. Yeah, it's exactly right. The very last thing it did was it applied the step. In fact, the reason that the loop terminates is because the control variable gets outside of the boundaries it's supposed to be in. So this is supposed to be between 189 and 4. And when it steps to actually be 4, that's still legal. Like when it does the step to take it so that the control variable is 4, that's okay. It loops for that one. That's why, oh, it's gone. That's why if I run this, it will actually print that 4. Right? It prints the 4 because it stays in the loop while it's in bounds. But when it gets to the next, that next here, it takes it, it steps it one more down. That takes it out of range and it's done. We can exit out of that range faster. I mean, it's just a regular variable, like we could control it. After we print the column, we could say column equals 1. It's a weird thing to do to just set the control variable to a constant here. But the point here is that that's not going to loop now. It's only going to run, it'll enter here. It's going to set it to 4. I'm going to set it to 189. It'll print 189. We're going to take it out of range. It'll get to next, take it even further. It's still going to apply the subtract 1. It'll be out of range, and then it will say, yeah, we're done. So I'll run that, and it will only print once. And call now has what value? Yeah. So it's got 0 in it. Questions on the for loop? Yes. So both the 189 and 4 are valid values. So the first time through the loop, the control variable will be 189. The last time through the loop, it will be 4. And then depending on how I've stepped along the way, it'll do like, every other one. So if I did step 2 here, it would just, or -2, it would subtract 2 each time. But I could do this. Oh, by the way, well, if I did this, what have I just done? If I was to try to run this with this line in it, what would I have? Yeah, because I'm saying, listen, it's going to be 189. This is going to change that control variable to 190. It hits the next, and it's going to subtract the 1 off and go to 189. Yeah, I usually don't put do events into a for loop because, they've got a way to a standard way to get themselves out. But if I accidentally do something like that, I can put myself into an endless loop again. Here's proof. Running 189 just as fast as it can. Because I have the do events in there, it'll respect the pause button and it'll say, okay, you want to stop. Without that, I would be restarting Excel. But of course, I could also subtract 3 here. Whoops, minus 3. So now what numbers are going to be between, let's see, what will be the difference of the number that it prints? It's going to print 189, and the next one is going to print as what? 185, yeah, 4 less, because I'm subtracting 3 off of it. The next will subtract 1 more off of it, and it should print. Let's go ahead and actually do that. F8. Oops. I'm not quite sure what I just did. Must have started again somehow. Prints 189, subtracts 3 off of it, subtracts 1 more off of it, prints 185. Okay, now there's one thing that we can do with all of these loops, and that is each one of these loops allows us to exit them prematurely. So I could have some other clause in here that I can look for some completely separate condition besides whatever is controlling the loop. So let's do this. Oh, let's go ahead and make this and so it brings the data in. So my control variable is controlling what I'm writing out to, but I'm going to need to read the data here as well. So let's see. I've got the range that's got the data in it. So the range has a method called cells, which is going to refer to the cells in the range. And if I give it 2 indices, it'll treat it like a grid. If I give it 1, it's just going to give me which cell that I'm after. And so here, it's a little bit weird. This is kind of a contrived example here. But let me just go ahead and say we're starting in 193 and we're starting at 189. Let me just count. Let me see how many cells we've got here. So rng.cells.count. 186 cells there. And so the first time through, I would like it to be the first cell. And so I'm just going to put an expression here that will be 189 minus call. So 190. Let's see. 190 minus call. So call the first time through, call is 189, this will evaluate to 190 minus 189, that'll be 1. The next time through, call will be a little bit smaller, it should be 2. Let me go ahead and just take this back to the top and run from there. I'm just going to ask for the address of this cell. So that's right now looking at E8. If I look at my data sheet, E8 is the one that I'm after. So that should bring in that 43. Again, kind of a contrived way to get at that data, but that should bring the data in right here. So I'm just going to run that out. And we're skipping here because I'm subtracting 3. Try that again without the extra step in there. And we can see that it's then put in all of that data. Now, let's suppose that when I find one of these values that is exactly equal to 26, that's another way that I would like to terminate this loop. Like as soon as I see unemployment of 26, there's something special about that. I want to stop my loop at that point. So I'm going to go ahead and put the value in. Then I'm going to say if we haven't seen the details of the if statement yet, we played with it just a little bit, then and if some condition here that when it's true, what's inside that if is going to execute. And so I've just put the value here. So let me just check what that value is. I'm going to say if that value is equal to 26, then exit 4. So whether I'm using a for loop or a for next loop or a for each loop, exit 4 is the statement that just prematurely gets me out of the loop. Exit do will get me out of a do loop. And so let me go ahead and just clear this data off. And I'll run this loop again. And it seems like, oh, I need to be on the sheet with the data. And we'll run it. It seemed like that should have brought it. What am I missing? I'm going to step through F8. Bring in the column 189. Oh, it's probably going the other direction. Is it? Yeah. I think it was coming back this way. Found 26 here eventually. Found the 26 there in BI. And then it exited out of the loop. So the rest of these didn't get filled in. So you can, like the two ways out of the loop is either to just have the control variable finish what it's trying to do, and that'll terminate the loop, or you can have some if statement in there that will say, hey, at this point, I want to exit the loop. By the way, exit works not just for loops, but also for sub-procedures. So if I wanted to, I could say here exit sub, even though it's in the loop, it would yank me all the way out of the sub procedure. Just say, hey, whatever is going on here, we're done. Get me out of here. So exit 4 will let you terminate that early. And I think that's what I wanted to cover on loops today. Kind of unusual for us to get out like 12 minutes early, but I'm not opposed to it. Any questions? Any questions on the project that's due Wednesday? All right, thanks for coming. Class dismissed.